Welcome to the Daily Brain Podcast. We explore a new word every day and even provide a fictional story to help you expand your knowledge of commonly used, but often vaguely explained, terms being used in daily conversations. Our mission is to help you become the person most comfortable in any group discussion and possibly considered as the most insightful.
Absolutely. And today, we're diving deep into a word you've probably heard tossed around, but might not fully grasp: gaslighting.
It's a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, but I think it's important to really understand what it means and how it plays out in real life.
It's about psychological manipulation, making someone doubt their sanity and question their own reality. We've got a ton of sources for this deep dive. Articles, transcripts, even comments from people who've experienced gaslighting firsthand. We're going to break it all down.
It can be a heavy topic, but don't worry, we'll keep it engaging and informative. You ready to get informed?
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is how this term gaslighting originated.
Oh, I'm always up for a good origin story. Tell me more.
So it comes from a 1930s play and later 1940s films called Gaslight.
Gaslight, huh? Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the connection?
The play features a husband who dims the gas lights in his house and then convinces his wife she's imagining it.
Whoa, that's creepy.
It is, right? He's intentionally making her doubt her own senses, driving her to question her sanity. And that's exactly what gaslighting is all about.
So it's like a mind game, a way to control someone by messing with their perception of reality.
Exactly. But it goes beyond flickering lights. There are so many ways gaslighting can play out in real life.
Okay, so how does this gaslight scenario translate into everyday situations? What are some common tactics gaslighters use?
Well, one common tactic is called countering. It's all about questioning your memory, making you doubt what you remember.
Oh, I can see how that would be effective. You start to second guess yourself, wondering if you really did misremember things.
Exactly. Imagine someone saying, "You sure about that? You always misremember things," or "I think you're forgetting what really happened." It can be really subtle.
So it's not always blatant and aggressive. It can be these little digs that chip away at your confidence.
Exactly. And sometimes it's not about what they say, but what they don't say. Another technique is called withholding. They might refuse to engage in a conversation, pretend they don't understand, or just straight up ignore you.
Oh, the silent treatment. Classic. Makes you feel like you're talking to a wall.
Right. It's about making you feel unheard and like you're not communicating effectively. It plays into that self-doubt we were talking about.
And then there's trivializing,
Right.
where they just brush off your feelings like they don't matter.
Exactly. Like saying you're overreacting or you're being too sensitive. It's classic invalidation.
Instead of acknowledging your feelings, they're telling you that they're wrong or inappropriate. I can see how that would be damaging over time. What else do gaslighters do?
Another common one is denial. They might just flat out deny something happened.
Like, even if there's evidence.
They might forget, claim they didn't do something, or even try to blame someone else. Basically, they're rewriting history to fit their narrative.
So all of these tactics, the questioning, the silence, the trivializing, the denial, they all contribute to this feeling of losing your grip on reality.
Exactly. And that's what's so insidious about gaslighting. It's not physical violence or overt threats. It's this hidden form of abuse that can be really hard to pinpoint.
It makes you feel crazy, right? Like, is this really happening or am I losing my mind?
It's like you're in this constant state of confusion and self-doubt. And in one of our sources, a therapist actually said, a lot of times people feel like they're losing their grip on reality.
And I bet there are people listening right now who are thinking, wait a minute, is this happening to me? So what are some red flags, some signs that someone might be experiencing gaslighting?
One telltale sign is feeling the need to record conversations just to prove what happened.
Wow, really? Like secretly recording?
It sounds extreme, but it comes from this deep sense of not being believed, like you need to validate your own experiences.
Because their version of reality is so different from yours that you need proof.
Exactly. But even when confronted with the recording, the gaslighter might deny it or twist it around. It's a no-win situation designed to keep you off balance.
So it's like being trapped in a maze with no exit. You're constantly second-guessing yourself, and there's no way to win. So how do you even begin to respond to something like that? We need to empower ourselves, right?
Absolutely. We need to give people tools to fight back. And one of the experts we looked at, Dr. Robin Stern, suggests 5 key shifts in mindset to help deal with gaslighting.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the first shift?
The first one is all about separating truth from distortion. You have to remember that gaslighters are masters at mixing truth with lies, making it really hard to know what's real.
That's so manipulative. They weave their lies into the truth so seamlessly that you start to question everything.
Right. So Dr. Stern suggests writing down what happened, he said, she said style, to get some clarity.
Oh, that's a good idea. Seeing it in black and white might help you see the manipulation more clearly. That's the next shift.
Shift number 2 is recognizing when you're being pulled into a power struggle and choosing to opt out.
Meaning, don't engage.
Gaslighting thrives on making you crave their approval, on making you desperately want to prove yourself right. Don't play that game.
So instead of trying to win the argument, you walk away.
Exactly. Take back your power.
I like that. You're not giving them the satisfaction of seeing you upset or trying to defend yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, what was that third shift Dr. Stern mentioned?
It's all about identifying triggers, both for you and the gaslighter. What are the topics, the words, the situations that tend to set off the gaslighting dynamic?
So once you know your triggers, you can try to avoid those situations or at least be prepared to disengage when they come up. That's smart. What about number 4?
This one's about focusing on your feelings rather than getting caught up in who's right or wrong.
Because with gaslighting, it's not really about being right. It's about control.
Exactly. So instead of getting sucked into that vortex of proving your point, take a step back and ask yourself, how am I feeling in this situation? If you're constantly feeling criticized, attacked, or belittled, that's a sign to disengage.
It's about prioritizing your own well-being over trying to win an argument that's designed to make you feel bad.
Right. You can't control their opinion, but you can control how you respond to it.
That's such an important reminder. Okay, what's that last shift?
This one's about acceptance. You have to accept that you can't control anyone's opinion, even if you're right.
Especially with a gaslighter who's committed to their distorted reality.
Exactly. And letting go of that need for control can be incredibly freeing.
This has been really eye-opening. We've talked about how gaslighting works, what it looks like, and even some ways to respond to it. But before we wrap up this part, I want to zoom out a bit. Can gaslighting happen outside of personal relationships?
Oh, absolutely. It can show up in families, workplaces, and even on a societal level. Think about the concept of racial gaslighting, for example.
Where people in positions of power use these tactics to discredit and silence marginalized groups.
Exactly. It's about using gaslighting to maintain power and control over entire groups of people.
That's scary to think about gaslighting on a systemic level.
It's a reminder that gaslighting isn't just a personal problem, it can be a societal issue as well. And it's crucial to recognize it and call it out in all its forms.
This has been a lot to unpack, but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. We've defined gaslighting, looked at the techniques, explored the psychological impact, and even touched on how to respond to it.
And we've got even more to dive into. In the next part, we'll be looking at specific real-life examples of gaslighting and how these dynamics can play out even in situations where someone might have good intentions. It's all about adding nuance to your understanding.
So stay tuned, we're just getting started.
Sometimes hearing specific examples can really bring a concept to life, wouldn't you say?
Totally. Let's get into some real-world scenarios. What kind of situations are we talking about?
Okay, well, let's start with romantic relationships, a common breeding ground for gaslighting.
Makes sense, unfortunately.
Imagine a partner who constantly questions your memory. You bring up a conversation, and they're like, that never happened, you're imagining things.
Total gaslight vibes.
Yeah.
You're going crazy, dear. So messed up.
Right. Or they downplay your feelings, you say you're hurt, and they're like, you're overreacting, it's not a big deal.
That constant invalidation. It must really eat away at your self-worth.
It does. You start doubting your own emotions, like you can't even trust yourself anymore. And over time, you might even start apologizing for things you didn't do just to avoid conflict.
Heartbreaking. Losing yourself in their manipulation. Are there other relationships where this happens?
Definitely. Parent-child relationships can be a prime example.
Oh, I can see that.
A controlling parent using gaslighting to undermine their child's confidence. It's a classic.
What would that sound like? Give me an example.
They might say things like, you're not capable of making your own decisions, or you're too sensitive for the real world. Stuff like that.
Wow. Harsh. Like they're trying to keep their child dependent on them.
And sadly, it often works. The child grows up believing they're inadequate, which can affect their self-esteem and relationships for years.
A reminder that gaslighting can happen anywhere, and the damage can be lasting. So what can you do if you realize you're being gaslighted? We talked about Dr. Stern's mindset shifts, but are there any practical steps to take?
One crucial step is setting boundaries.
Oh, I can imagine that's easier said than done, especially when you're dealing with someone who constantly pushes back.
It's not easy, But it's about clearly stating your reality even if they deny it. I know what I saw, or I remember what you said.
So you're basically refusing to be pulled into their warped version of events. What else?
Learning to disengage from those circular arguments that go nowhere.
Oh yeah, those are the worst.
If you find yourself repeating the same thing over and over, it's okay to say, we're not going to agree and I'm not going to continue this.
Right, like sometimes you just have to walk away.
Exactly. It takes strength, but it sends a powerful message.
You're showing them you're not playing their game anymore. Are there times when you need to go even further?
Sometimes, yeah. Especially if the gaslighting is really intense and doesn't let up. Sometimes the healthiest option is to remove yourself from the relationship completely.
Wow. That's a tough call to make, but I can see how it would be necessary in some cases.
It's about protecting yourself. This whole discussion. It makes me wonder if there are ever times when good intentions get mistaken for gaslighting.
That's an interesting point.
Like, we all make mistakes, right? Sometimes we misremember things. Could it be that someone is trying to correct you, not manipulate you?
Or maybe offering advice that, though well-intentioned, ends up invalidating your feelings.
It's definitely a nuance to think about. But remember, gaslighting is a deliberate pattern of behavior. It's not a one-off miscommunication.
So how do you distinguish between genuine concern and manipulative gaslighting? Seems tricky.
I think it comes down to looking at their intent. If someone truly cares about you, they'll be open to hearing your perspective.
They won't try to force their reality onto you.
All right. There's a difference between healthy disagreement and intentionally making someone doubt themselves.
Totally. It all comes back to communication, doesn't it?
It does. Being able to express your concerns, but also being willing to listen and respect other people's views, even if you don't agree.
Creating a safe space for dialogue.
Exactly. And sometimes that means acknowledging that we might be contributing to the problem, even unknowingly. You ever think about that? Like, have we all engaged in some subtle gaslighting behaviors at some point?
Whoa, that's a deep question. Makes you stop and examine your own actions.
It does, right? Could it be that we've all said or done things that might have made someone question their reality, even if we didn't mean to?
It's a call for self-reflection, for sure.
And a reminder that building healthy, respectful relationships takes work. From both sides.
This deep dive has been pretty amazing. We started with the origins of the term gaslighting, then explored its real-world effects, and even some ways to respond. And now we're even talking about how good intentions can sometimes be misconstrued, and how we might unknowingly engage in these behaviors ourselves.
It's a lot to take in.
But there's one more aspect I want to explore before we wrap up. It's something that adds a spiritual dimension to the whole conversation. Ready to dive into that?
Absolutely. That sounds fascinating. It is, right? It's kind of a whole different lens for looking at gaslighting through a spiritual lens.
I'm definitely curious to hear more about this perspective. How does spirituality tie into all of this?
Well, one of the sources we looked at, a YouTube transcript, talks about gaslighting in the context of dealing with narcissists.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Narcissists are all about control, twisting reality to fit their needs.
Exactly. And the speaker in the video emphasizes the importance of trusting in God's justice when you're in a situation like that.
So instead of getting caught up in trying to prove them wrong or make them see your side of things, you're surrendering the situation to a higher power.
Right. You're recognizing that you can't control someone else's behavior, but you can choose how you respond.
That's powerful. But does that mean you're just letting the gaslighter get away with it?
It's not about condoning their behavior, but it is about understanding that true transformation comes from within. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just step aside and let a higher power handle it.
It's about focusing on your own spiritual well-being, not getting sucked into their drama.
Exactly.
But what about all the anger and resentment that comes with being gaslighted? How do you deal with that from a spiritual perspective?
The speaker in the transcript talks about the power of prayer. Praying for the narcissist, not because they necessarily deserve it, but because it helps you to release those negative emotions.
So it's not about them. It's about you finding peace.
Right. And it's recognizing that everyone is capable of change and healing, even if you don't see it.
This brings up another question. Does surrendering the situation to God also mean forgiving the gaslighter?
Well, forgiveness is a process, and it's not always easy, but it is about freeing yourself from the bitterness and anger.
It's not about condoning their actions. It's about letting go of the hold they have over you.
It's about reclaiming your power.
You know, it's amazing how much we've covered in this deep dive. We started with defining gaslighting, looked at the effects, and learned ways to respond to it. We even talked about how good intentions can sometimes be mistaken for gaslighting, and how we all might unknowingly engage in those behaviors ourselves.
It really makes you think.
It does. In this spiritual perspective, it just adds a whole other layer of depth to the conversation.
It's a reminder that there's always hope, even in tough situations.
And as we wrap up, there's one question that keeps coming back to me. Could some of these gaslighting tactics, especially in families or close relationships, be unintentional, maybe stemming from their own insecurities or past experiences?
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe sometimes people who engage in those behaviors aren't even fully aware of the harm they're causing.
Doesn't excuse it, of course, but it adds a layer of complexity to the issue.
It does. Reminds us to approach these situations with empathy while also protecting our own well-being.
This deep dive has been so insightful, and I hope it's given our listeners some tools to recognize and deal with gaslighting.
We looked at it from so many angles: psychological, practical, even spiritual.
And remember, you're not alone. If you're dealing with gaslighting, reach out to someone you trust. There's help out there.
Exactly. Talk to a friend, a family member, a therapist. You don't have to go through this alone.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into gaslighting. It's a tough topic, but knowledge is power. Understanding is the first step.
And that's what the Daily Brain podcast is all about. Equipping you with the knowledge you need to navigate those tricky conversations and become the most insightful person in the room.
So keep those brains engaged, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
In the quiet seaside town of Driftwood Bay, nestled between rolling hills and a wide, shimmering ocean, there stood an old lighthouse. It hadn't been used in decades but remained a landmark that everyone in town knew about. Stories about the lighthouse's history swirled like the sea breeze, but most were harmless tales, except one. "They say the lighthouse keeper's ghost still roams there," whispered Molly, the town's gossip enthusiast, to a group of kids gathered at the park. "And if you get too close, you'll hear the whispers of the sea, telling you things that aren't true." 12-year-old Jamie wasn't scared. Jamie loved solving mysteries, whether it was a lost set of keys or figuring out who broke the classroom window last week. The mention of the lighthouse sparked his curiosity, but it wasn't until his best friend, Ruby, mentioned something strange that he decided to investigate. "I was near the lighthouse yesterday, and I swear I heard someone calling my name," Ruby said, her green eyes wide with unease. "But when I turned around, no one was there." Jamie raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure it wasn't the wind?" "It wasn't the wind," Ruby insisted. "It sounded real." The next day, Jamie and Ruby set out toward the lighthouse, their backpacks stuffed with snacks, flashlights, and Jamie's trusty notebook. The path to the lighthouse was overgrown but manageable. The structure loomed ahead, its once bright white paint now peeling, and its windows clouded with dust. As they approached, they heard a faint sound. It was soft, almost like a hum, and it seemed to come from within the lighthouse. "Did you hear that?" Ruby asked, clutching Jamie's arm. Jamie nodded, his pulse quickening. "Let's check it out." They pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The air was cool and damp, and the interior was dimly lit by the sunlight streaming through cracks in the walls. The hum grew louder, then stopped suddenly. Ruby shivered. "Hello?" Jamie called out, his voice echoing. "Is anyone here?" There was no response. Over the next week, strange things began happening. Ruby swore she left her bike at the park, but Jamie found it near the lighthouse. Jamie's flashlight, always kept in his desk drawer, mysteriously ended up under his bed. Even their friend Max claimed someone knocked on his window late at night, though he lived far from the lighthouse. "It's like someone's playing tricks on us," Ruby said one afternoon as they sat on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore. "Or trying to make us think we're losing it," Jamie added, frowning. "Gaslighting." Ruby tilted her head. "What's that?" "It's when someone makes you doubt what you know is true," Jamie explained. "Like moving things around and pretending you're imagining it." Ruby's eyes widened. "But who would do that?" Determined to find answers, the trio decided to stake out the lighthouse that night. Armed with sleeping bags, a thermos of hot chocolate, and Jamie's notebook, they settled into a hidden spot among the bushes. The moon cast a silver glow over the lighthouse, and the waves provided a rhythmic background. Hours passed without incident. Just as Ruby began to doze off, Max nudged Jamie. "Look," he whispered, pointing toward the lighthouse. A faint light flickered in one of the windows. "Someone's in there," Jamie whispered back. "Come on." They crept toward the lighthouse, careful not to make noise. The door, which they had closed earlier, was now ajar. Inside, the hum they'd heard before was back, but it was interspersed with whispers. "Stay close," Jamie said, leading the way up the spiral staircase. The whispers grew louder as they ascended. When they reached the top, they found an old lantern glowing on the floor, but no one was there. "This doesn't make sense," Ruby said, picking up the lantern. As she did, the whispers stopped. The room fell silent. Over the next few days, the kids pieced together the mystery. They discovered old town records in the library that revealed a shocking truth. Decades ago, a lighthouse keeper named Mr. Harding had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some believed he'd left town, others thought he'd been driven mad by loneliness. But the most chilling theory was that he'd been sabotaged by a rival who wanted his job. What if someone's pretending to be Mr. Harding's ghost? Max suggested. To keep people away. Jamie nodded. That would explain the tricks and the whispers. But why? Their answer came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while exploring the lighthouse again, they found a hidden trapdoor beneath a dusty rug. Inside was a stash of tools and a map marked with an X on the cliffs near the lighthouse. "This must be what they're hiding," Ruby said, holding the map. "But what's at the cliffs?" That evening, they followed the map to the cliffs and discovered a hidden cave. Inside were crates filled with strange gadgets and equipment. Before they could investigate further, a voice boomed behind them. "What are you kids doing here?" They turned to see Mr. Thompson, the town's maintenance man, glaring at them. "This is private property." Jamie stepped forward. "You're the one behind the lighthouse tricks, aren't you?" Mr. Thompson's face darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, we do," Jamie said, his voice steady. "You've been trying to scare people away so no one would find this cave. What's in those crates?" Under their questioning, Mr. Thompson admitted the truth. He'd been using the lighthouse's eerie reputation to cover up his secret project, a new type of fishing equipment he planned to patent and sell. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said, looking ashamed. "I just didn't want anyone snooping around." "But you made us doubt ourselves," Ruby said. "That's not okay." Mr. Thompson apologized and promised to stop his tricks. The kids reported everything to the town council, and Mr. Thompson's project was moved to a more suitable location. The lighthouse, now free of its eerie reputation, became a favorite spot for the townsfolk to explore. As the sun set over Driftwood Bay, Jamie, Ruby, and Max sat on the beach, watching the lighthouse glow softly in the distance. "Another mystery solved," Jamie said, scribbling in his notebook. Ruby smiled. "And no more gaslighting." "Exactly," Jamie agreed. "The truth always comes out, no matter how hard someone tries to hide it."